Good morning, everyone. It is July 22nd, 9:30 a.m. This is our workshop on the 2013-14 school grade data and information that was just released last week. Dr. Adams, thank you very much for getting this together so promptly. So let's get started.
Okay. It's an information meeting. We want you to have an opportunity to understand the data, what it means. It's even though this is the last of this particular formula, it's very public, and I think that it's important for the board to have as much background information as possible. I've asked our performance data analyst to really do the presentation, and I really would like to brag on Brian a little bit because Brian McMahon, because number one, he brings a great perspective because he just came out of the classroom. He was a teacher in the classroom for many years. He understands the stress of assessments and schools. He understands the meaning of the data, and he has brought a lot of, he's doing a lot of work for the school district with regard to looking at lots of different kind of data and giving us good analysis. So I'm going to let him present it. I think he and I have agreed that if there are questions as we go along, because there's a lot of numbers, it might be good to go ahead and answer those questions as we go along, and then at the end we'll answer any other questions you might have. So Brian, thank you for this work that you've done, and we'll let you present.
You've got two documents. One is the actual PowerPoint and notes pages, and then what I did was some of the charts that were a little too small to read, I printed those out with this.
Thank you.
So everything will be up here on the projector, but if you wanted to note as we go along at your own pace. So
that for the old people.
I'm
Nice.
finding as I approach 40, I'm kind of holding it back, and John Dewey was a constructionist, believed that education is growth, that you never arrive at a point in which you are now educated, that education is a lifelong pursuit. In the same way, the philosophy of our schools is we're never going to arrive at a certain point. So even if the school grades came back and everything was A's and everything was aced, we'd still be meeting with you guys to explain where the school grades are and where we're going with that. So as Dr. Adams pointed out, this workshop is meant to provide you with a little insight into where the school grades actually were and where we're going to go from here. Okay? So in order to grow, you have to understand where you were. And that's where the first, there we go, bit of explanation needs to take place. With the transition of FCAT 2.0 and 1112, the state instituted a safety net. And the safety net provided that no school would be lowered more than one grade level in a year. And that was a fantastic idea. It kind of lessened the blow to a more rigorous testing. Unfortunately, it had a unintended consequence, and that is that when a school's grade only lowers one level, you truly don't get a perspective of where they actually are. And that's important not necessarily for that year, but the next year, in the sense that you really don't understand if there was growth, or if there was, how much growth there was. So as an example, I'd like to point out Glendale Elementary. We know that Glendale Elementary had some phenomenal growth. They were a C last year, and this year they are now an A school. However, last year they benefited from this safety net. So if you actually look at the grade that Glendale earned, they actually earned an F last year. So the growth from a C to an A actually minimizes the growth that they actually did show. They actually were a failing school last year, and now they are an A school. So the first chart details the growth that Glendale experienced, and you can see that across all areas they had phenomenal growth. Their learning gains, both at the lowest quartile and with their school-wide, showed phenomenal growth, and you can see with that chart detailed all the numbers there for you. The percent growth from 12-13 is a percent over 12-13. So you'll see that for math learning gains, for instance, it's 102%. It doesn't mean they increased 102 points. It means that from last year to this year, they increased 102%, meaning they doubled what they were doing last year. So that's one example of a school that benefited last year from this safety net, and it masked or minimized the level of growth that they experienced. And then I have the other schools. There are a number of schools who, as a result of their 12-13 receiving that safety net, masked or minimized their growth. So Beachland, last year, they were reported as a B school. They, in fact, were actually a C if you look at their points earned. So when they improved this year to an A, it wasn't just that they went from a B to an A. They actually went from a C earned to an A. Dodgertown, when you look at the school grades, they appeared as if they just maintained their D, when in fact last year they were actually a failing school. This year, now that they are reported as a D, that actually shows some growth. Highlands, they were reported last year as a C. They actually were a failing school. This year they improved to a D. Treasure Coast, last year was reported as a B. They too were a failing school. This year they were reported as a C, and that is one of two schools that benefited from the safety net this year. Vero Beach Elementary was the second one. So even if we look at their actual grade for this year as a D, they did improve from that F earned to a D earned this year. And then Storm Grove, they improved from a B to an A, but in reality it was actually from a C to an A. One other thing to understand about this year's grading system is that there are, and actually I brought it here, this is the 55-page document that details school grades. It's very complex. It's a complex calculation, which on one hand you want it to be. We don't want to reduce our schools to a simple grade level without really looking at everything. But on the other hand, there are a myriad of penalties, of bonus points, of things that kind of either inflate or deflate a school grade. For example, for Osceola Magnet, they actually earned well more than a points for an A. They were at 565, I believe, this year, which is 40 points over where they needed to be for an A. But they were given a B. And the reason why they were given a B is that they didn't meet one of these criteria. And one of those criteria is that the lowest quartile of students need to show at least 50% growth, learning gains, in both reading and math to maintain the A. And they had 49%. And that comes down to one student, literally one kid, either in the denominator or numerator that showed learning gains. So we are looking at that, making sure the data is complete and correct, and possibly going to appeal that depending on the analysis of the data. But that's a school that shows a B, but in reality they earned their A. To give you an idea of the complexity of this, Pelican Island also had their grade lowered from a C to a D. In order to be an A school, you have to maintain 50% learning gains in your lowest quartile. To be a B or a C, you also have to have 50%. However, to be a B or C, they allow you to look at last year or the current year. So if you had 50% learning gains in the year prior or this year, then you can maintain your B or C. If you don't have 50%, they lower the threshold to 40% as long as you show 1% growth from last year to this year. If you didn't have 40%, you had below 40, you could still earn this B or C if you showed 5% of growth. So it's just this convoluted if this, if this, if this, if this. One of the things that the Commissioner of Education has recognized is that this is just not fair. It's convoluted, people don't understand it, it's giving a false impression of grades. Going forward, and I'll get into more detail about next year's grades, but she's eliminated all of this. There is no bonus points. There are no automatic, if you don't get this, your grade's lowered. So it's something the Commissioner has recognized that is not fair to schools. It's not casting them in the correct light, and it is something that they are looking to address. Okay? So again, Osceola Magnet and Pelican Island both had their grades lowered one level as a result of a minimal, we're talking about, in Osceola's case, one student. In Pelican Island, we're talking about a handful of kids' performance. So this first chart, and it's the first chart, or the second chart in your packet of O charts. It is the actual grade improvement, and it is without the safety net. So what this looks at is the 2013 actual grades that were earned compared to the 2014 actual grades that are earned. So I've removed, in this case, both safety nets on both years. In 2013, I think we had like 7 or 8 schools that benefited from it, and then this year we just had the 2 schools, VBE and Treasure Coast. So you can see that 7 of the 21 schools increased the actual grade earned. 5 of the 21 did decrease their actual grade earned, and 9 of the 24 maintained the actual grade earned. And if we look at Osceola and Pelican Island without the penalty, that actually increases to 8 of 21 increasing, 9 of 21 maintaining, and 4 of 21 declining. And of course I said 21 because of the 3 schools, the 3 high schools that have pending grades. All 3 of those, by the way, did improve their FCAT grades by approximately 30 to 40 points for each school. And then on the next chart is the actual points earned. And this kind of gives you a different perspective on it. In this case, 14 of the 24 schools increased the points earned by an average increase of 13%. 8 of 24 schools decreased, and then 2 of 24 schools maintained their points earned. So the comparison between this chart and last chart was that even though we had a number of schools maintain their grade, a number of those schools that maintained their grade actually did show growth. It was just from a low C to a high C, or a low B to a high B, and so forth.
Yes, Patty.
Yeah, and looking at this chart, the growth for Glendale was 210 points. That is pretty impressive. The next closest is North County. To what is that attributed to?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is leadership. They have, I think Mr. Faust has shown himself to be a positive leader who has really worked hard with the staff, and I believe the school culture has changed a lot. Glendale has a good staff. They were supported this year with the DA office. They actually benefited, and that was felt by the staff and Mr. Faust. They opened they opened themselves up to having the Department of Education, the DA office, come in and support them with technical assistance. They used it, they benefited from it, and I think today if he were sitting here, he would tell you that same thing. So it's a combination of things, but they opened, they were very open to technical support. They have a good staff. They were able to take that information and move with it, and the school culture has benefited from his leadership.
Just as a follow-up, how many other schools were had differentiated accountability?
Dodgertown, which benefited from a 65-point gain. Okay. They were the only 2 schools where the DA went in last year and provided technical assistance they came in, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 times and actually met with district staff after they met with the leadership at the schools and met with teachers. So they did a very thorough job.
And also to couple with that, I can tell you, going into virtually every school doing data analysis training, I was shocked at the level of understanding of Glendale. They had a team of people that were hungry for the data, and it wasn't like at the summer airfield we talked about being aware of data and then consuming data. We all know there's data out there. We've got charts, we've got percentages. They showed definitely an increased awareness in consuming that data. They were dying for the benchmark tests to come out to see where they were. When you talk to the team, they knew individual students. They were looking to see if a student was improving or this student was improving. They wanted to know teachers, how did the teachers' class performance. So they stood out in the training as far as understanding how to use the data.
And I would add that being able to have somebody like Brian go out when they need it and provide that training and that deeper level of understanding is another positive thing that we're able to support the schools with.
So the next few charts show in detail our learning gains. It's important that not just we have students that are proficient, but we have students that are learning. And that we recognize that we don't have 100% of our students proficient. So the state also recognizes that, and they actually throw some considerable points in terms of the school grade towards learning gains. So what I've done is I've divided out first the overall learning gains in reading and math. Both of these are given 100 points in the school grade, and you'll see that as you scroll through with the reading, 18 of the 24 schools increased the points earned by an average increase of 15% in their learning gains for reading. This is something that, in looking at the school grades, immediately drawn to, this is something that we can kind of hang our hat on, because this shows that we are increasing. While we don't have the proficiency, it's not like overnight students are going to go from 3 grade levels below grade level to on or above. This shows they are making growth. So you'll see with the reading, 18 of the 24 increased the points earned. With math, not as marked improvement, but certainly 11 of 24 schools increased the points earned by an average increase of 24% over 12-13. So the growth is there. And then the state looks at the lowest quartile of students. The lowest quartile of students, they look at each grade level and look at the 25th percentile of students in each grade level, and then every student scoring at that level or below is in this cohort of lowest quartile. Now this is just looking at 4th and 5th grade students, just because with the lowest quartile you have to have a prior year score, and with 3rd grade being the first year, we're only looking at a very small segment of the population of a school. But it is something that the state does put an emphasis on. And so the lowest quartile in reading, you'll see 20 of the 24 schools increased by an average of 28% over 12-13. These are the students who some might argue would have the greatest needs, in the sense that they are below grade level. By definition, you must be a level 1 or 2 student. So in a school like Osceola Magnet, who has a high proficiency rate, their lowest quartile is actually a lot less than 25% of their school, simply because they don't have that many level 1 and 2 students. So all of their level 1 and 2 students are in the lowest quartile. So in terms of lowest quartile, we are looking at students below grade level. And for 20 of the 24 schools to make learning gains, and by making learning gains, there are 3 ways. One is you can maintain a level 3, 4, or 5, which in this case with the lowest quartile doesn't apply because they're all level 1 and 2. The second way is you can increase a level, go from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3. And then the third way is they are statistically able to verify a year's worth of growth within this scale score. And so if you achieve that year's worth of growth, you are deemed to have had made learning gains. So this represents a percentage of students who have either jumped a level or made at least 1 year's worth of learning growth in a year.
But so our community can see
Sorry.
that as well.
So that's reading. And only one of those 24 schools decreased. And I need to explain this because at first glance, that looks bad. Osceola Magnet decreased by 33%. However, when you look at Osceola Magnet, they have such a high performance rate that this lowest quartile, we're only talking about a total of 30 kids in their lowest quartile, and it varies year to year. So it's 1 year it might be 25, the next year it might be 35, but we're talking about 30 to 32 kids. And so in this case, this 33% decline is only about 8 students that did not make learning gains this year as opposed to last year. So at first glance, it's pretty significant number, but it actually, in reality, when you look at the data, it's not that big of a decrease.
Ms. Jimenez?
Yeah, it may not be for this workshop, but is there any way of helping us understand how you actually quantify a year's worth of learning growth? How is that quantified? Is there some way of explaining that? Maybe not right now.
Sure.
because
No,
it's
I
probably
can-
very involved.
I can probably give you a brief explanation. If that doesn't satisfy, I could probably get a little more detail, but you're right, probably not be for this. But basically, it's statistically. They're looking at the state, and they're looking at average growth, and from that, they derive a year's worth of growth from grade to grade. Each grade level is different because they're looking at from 3rd to 4th, on average, third grade score this, 4th grade score this, and they statistically account for lack of performance or performance based on whether they're proficient or not.
So
I
they
know-
look at all the students in the state and then use all that data to come up with the magic number for
It's
learning.
similar to how they do VAM in the sense that they are looking at, on average, across the state, students score this, and they account for it by covariates. ESC students aren't going to grow as much as gifted students, so they account statistically for those two populations. And when they do all those, looking at the covariates, they get that average
Okay.
growth. And I say average, it's probably not the best use of the word, but to me, it makes sense. It's that average growth. Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Disney?
Well, when the grades come out, the parents tend to have a reaction to the grades without having all this data. I mean, if you had a child who's in the lowest quartile and you had this data, you would be, you would feel good that that's being targeted and that our lowest quartile is improving, right? So, so naturally, parents want, they want the best school for their kids, and in their perception, they may try to, move to some other schools. So, with the current grading system, is it this homogenization that happens when you have people fleeing to these other schools? Is this, perhaps not the best for our kids, because we want our lowest quartile to be in some of these higher performing schools, because that way they have, they can move up. I mean, do we need to address that at all?
I would say a couple of things. Number one, I don't know that many in our public have a lot of confidence in how the school grades are derived today because of just what we're talking about and the complexity of it and how it's been changed over the years. However, having said that, I do know that school grade still carries tremendous weight in the eyes of the parent who has, for many of the parents who have children at school. For example, I got a call from a parent who had a lot of choices. She had the paper in front of her that had the points and was questioning, well, why did Osceola get a B when I can see that the number of points for an A? Does that mean that, because in their eyes it means if it went to from an A to a B or a B to a C, that the school is not doing as well? And it's one test, 1 year, one group of students. And while we know that, that's still the danger of one grade coming out to the public. And it's difficult to explain. We're on TV this morning explaining it. Brian and I are going on to Cynthia Filardo's show tomorrow to talk more about it. So we want our public to know about it, but it is difficult to explain and help them understand that these are good schools. There's a lot more that happens in these schools than just the school grade based on FCAT.
We're going to get a little bit into that as well to kind of further answer that, but just a couple on Dr. Adams' answer. School grade is just representative of a very small, less than half of the elementary school's population, in the sense that proficiency is 3, 4, and 5 grade levels. So they leave out K1 and 2 altogether, and that's 200 of the 600 points. And then the learning gains is just 4th and 5th grade.
Right.
So when you see that a school is a C school or an A school or an F school, it's not to belittle it, just like Dr. Adams said, it does carry a lot of weight, but it's one piece of a larger puzzle. Middle schools, it does carry all 3 grade levels are counted in the school grade, but it's just math and reading. In high school, you're talking about just the 9th and 10th grade kids on that. So I agree with you that I think that sometimes a little too much weight, but we live in a Twitter society where the most people are going to read into it is 140 characters. And so they latch onto this, it's a C school. It's easy, it's digestible. And I think that it's our job to educate, as much as possible.
May I follow up? Yeah, so it's because parents care about the grade that it matters so much, because their confidence in their school is a big part of their participation.
Absolutely.
And it's, that feeling about the schools rub off onto the kids. And so even though it's really difficult to explain, we've got to do our best to do that, because they need to understand that the school, their child's okay at the school they're at, particularly if they're an emerging reader. So.
I agree.
And we've got other data that's not part of FCAT that we'll be sharing with you, that the K-2 are making gains as well. I mean, we've got support, for that, but the only thing that's reported are the gains for 4th and 5th grade. But that's, again, we're going to try and get more information out, but it is
It's a process.
Yeah, okay, let's see what else we have. Thank you.
anything else?
Okay.
So we have the lowest quartile in math. 13 of 24 schools increase the points earned by an average increase of 23% over 12-13. And we did have a few more schools decrease, but the rate of decrease was slightly lower at 13% over 12-13.
And I'd like to say one more thing about these as you look at them, is we're not satisfied with where we are. I mean, and so there's a lot, and I'm thinking about math in particular. I mean, we're seeing a lot more gains in the reading area, but in the math, we recognize that we need to do some more things in that. So it's not a matter of saying we are making strides, but there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of getting to those levels of proficiency.
I think it's a great segue because that's the last of your charts in your chart is just this room to grow. And we recognize, as Dr. Adams pointed out, is that there is still room to grow. Even though that we do feel that the grades are a positive thing, that we are showing growth, we are on the road to having A schools, we still recognize that there are places in which we can grow. What I've done on this chart is I've grouped the reading and math separately so you can see across the board in a little bit easier light how we're doing in reading and then how we're doing in math. One of the things too that we recognize, it's a phenomenon called a regression to the mean, in the sense that when schools show a decreased or a lower proficiency, but they show a marked increase in learning gains, it's a regression to the mean where the high kids fall, the low kids come up, and you regress to the mean. And it's something that we notice with a few of these schools, and it's something that we've addressed, that not only do we need to provide the support for this lowest quartile of students, but we also need to differentiate our instruction and provide challenging enrichment activities for the kids who are on grade level. And it's not saying that they're not doing it. It was just something the data kind of spoke out at some of the schools that we need to give a little bit greater emphasis on that.
And I think one of the things is last year is really when we got hit in the knees with school grades in terms of, when it came down to all of those changes. It wasn't reflected so much in our school grades. They went down, but the unintended consequence, now is that it looks like we've gone down again. And it's not because of the data, but it is because of the of what was put in place with regard to only going down one. There's no blame or shame here. It's looking at where we are, honoring the fact that we are making some gains in some areas, but there's work to be done, and what are we going to do to get the next level?
So with the high schools, the grade is pending, and the reason why is that the FCAT is only half of their data. The other half is dealing with graduation rates, acceleration, AP, IB, ACE for some districts, college readiness, and those factors take a little bit longer for the state to produce. Their school grades don't come out until, they say, the fall, but the fall turns into December. So just a couple changes to be aware of in preparation for that. The state has raised the bar in terms of A's, their grading. And it's in statute that when a certain number of schools achieve an A, they automatically raise the bar. And they do that until they get 90% of the total points earned as an A, 80% is B, to reflect a traditional A through F. So they will continue to raise this bar as schools become better and better performing. And it's important because going from last year to this year, a school can improve significantly and actually go down a grade level. And what I've done is I've put together here the chart of what makes an A. So you'll see last year it was only 1,050 points. For this coming year, it's 1,120. It's a gain of 70 points to maintain that A. So school can show significant growth and yet go from an A to a B this year.
Yes, Ms. Disney.
As a mathematician, tell me why they would raise the bar rather than find one of the aspects that is easy to achieve and just not place as much emphasis on that one aspect of it.
I think it's a choice. I think that what they have is two reasons. One is it's statute. They say these are the things that you need to have in your school grade. But I think in reality, they want those to be in there. And I don't think that across the state there's any one category that is just everyone is knocking it out of the ballpark. This is a way, I'm going to say it's fairer. I don't know if it's necessarily that, but it's their version of increasing the rigor as each year goes by.
Okay.
I don't know if I answered that.
Well, I mean, increasing the rigor is a legitimate answer. That's a good answer. I just was just curious if that was going to create a hardship for some of the schools that are having trouble reaching some of the.
I think the state gets a little bit of flack in the sense of
Perception, maybe?
perception, in the sense that it's almost like they wait to see where the grades are and then they put whether they're, which ones are A's and B's, and there's a certain truth to that, and then there's also, it's, they do have to maintain. They don't want 100% of schools to be failing, so they've got to set that bar where we are.
Yes, Ms. Menace.
So another way to look at this, would it be correct to infer that the way the bar has been set has really not been to the level of rigor that we would like to see? So over time, it's being increased, but at some point it's going to, it has to stop, and probably not at 100% like they tried to do with No Child Left Behind. So it's because it's a process and you can't do it from one year to the next to reach that ideal. And I guess the question would be, who determines what the ideal is, especially when we're looking at a new assessment that's being field tested in another state, and we don't even know if it even reflects our Florida standards, and what role is that going to play in our overall?
I think your characterization is spot on. To answer your question, who is determining that? It's the state legislature that defines that. You brought up the 100% proficiency. To some extent, I think even what their ideal is pretty darn close to that. I don't want to say pie in the sky, but 90% of the points earned for a high school, you're looking at A to be about 1,440 points. And right now, we're looking at schools around 1,000 to 1,100 for both of our schools. So to gain 350 points, especially as you mentioned, is going to the Florida standards with these new tests that we don't know anything about, and the increased rigor. And I'm not sure we'll ever see that 90%. I would hope that we would. I mean, it's certainly an ideal, but I think in reality, I don't think that. I think it's just still too beyond where we are. And that's kind of why they want to do this step. We'll increase it as it goes.
Dr. Adams.
The other thing I would say that I can appreciate about the high school grade is that it takes many factors into account. It simply isn't based on an FCAT score and different things, but it does look at end of course exams, AP, IB, acceleration, it was performance and
Growth, participation.
participation. Now, is it this year that goes
Going
in?
forward, no, next year.
Next year it goes in where it's performance and not so much participation. So I at least feel that the high school grades are based on a lot more data about what's happening in your school than simply a score on FCAT.
The other change this year to high school grades is the U.S. History EOC will be included. Just so you know, it's not a blame game, but we didn't find that out till March of this year. So not that we're not putting an emphasis on EOCs, but that late in the game, it was kind of hard to adjust. Finding out it was definitely a shock to us. The thing that might hurt us is that where they put this in the school grade is it used to be the AP and IB performance participation used to be a total of 300 points, 150 for participation, 150 for performance. They've lowered those two to 100 points each, and that extra 100 points is where the EOC for U.S. history is. So it's bad for our schools in the sense that we've always done really well with the AP and IB, both participation and performance. So they're taking a measure in which we were sometimes anywhere from 90 to 100% way they calculated it, and replacing it with the U.S. history. And the U.S. history wasn't that much. So, just another item to be aware of as we move into the high school grades. And that does bring us to a transition to the 14-15 changes to the grading system. With the transition to the full adoption of the Florida standards, there are some significant changes to the way schools are going to be graded. And I want to talk to you a little bit about this. The commissioner, in proposing this mode or model of grading, realized that there were a lot of complications to the school grading, and that school grades didn't actually reflect a total understanding of where the school is. So she tried to reduce some of those automatic gains, automatic penalties, and made some other changes to make it a little bit easier to understand. One change is everything is everything is a percentage. Out of 100%, what percentage of kids are this? And that's different because of graduation rates as well as the acceleration performance participation at the high school level, they were out of 150 or 50 points. And so when you saw 40 out of 50 for a graduation rate, you didn't see 40 out of 50, you saw 40. And so that kind of cast it in a light to, wow, only 40% graduated. And it was actually 80% graduated. So one of the changes going forward is everything's going to be out of 100 points, no matter what it is. So everything will be directly translated to a percentage. One other change is that writing has always been a separate test. Going forward to this year, writing is encompassed into the ELA testing, so that it will not be a separate proficiency. It will be involved within the ELA. They have yet to tell us exactly how writing is going to be encompassed in that. They are in the process of releasing a lot of those items. They've released some items, and the item specs really, which defines a blueprint of the test. They've yet to release that, so we're still waiting on some of that. So elementary, we'll see the least. Sorry.
Ms. Disney had a question.
How about who is tested and which scores count? Were there any changes to that?
We don't know yet. And to be honest with you, this is the 2013-14 school grading manual. This was just released maybe a week or two ago. It was released after the school grades came out. And this tells me exactly who's involved, who's not involved, and so forth. So over the course of the year, we go to workshops from the state, and they kind of tell us bits and pieces as they figure it out, but we don't get the actual written language until after grades have come out. So kind of going forward to this new year, really that's all we have. However, we know that it's radically changed. So I can tell you that for 13-14, there was not a lot of change on who was involved in it. I can't imagine it to be huge changes going forward, but again, it's
Dr. Adams.
hard to say.
I would want the board and the public to know that we have been very frustrated as school districts at the delays in getting this type of information. And just yesterday, we got information on the item bank, which just released for the assessments. The week before, we got the information on assessment items for next year. So everything has been delayed, probably 3 to 6 months of what we thought districts were going to do. So we're going into a new year where teachers don't have the information that they could have used to prepare for Florida standards and new assessments.
Well, it's just I was concerned with the inclusion laws of parents having to sign out of general ed rather than, So I was thinking, there may be some profoundly disabled students that are now going to be included in the tests unless they are exempted.
Yeah, I still think we have the 1%, up to 1% can be alternatively assessed. I think that's still in place.
Okay.
Okay. So the elementary model is going to see the least amount of changes. The English language arts are going to include the writing. They're still looking at performance, learning gains, and then learning gains for the lowest quartile. Math still have performance, learning gains, and learning gains the lowest quartile. And then science will just be performance. So you'll see it's out of 700 points. There will also be no bonus points, no automatic lowering or raising of grades. It will strictly be the grade that the school earns. One other change, because of, and it's their version of the safety net, that if a school does fail this year, there will be no penalties. There'll be no repercussions. There won't be any kind of state coming into that school and with a differential accountability or any of the other plans. There will be no repercussions from getting that for this year. The side note to that is if a school was an F school this year and improved next year, they still are under the same penalties they were as a failing school. So there's no penalties, nor is there relief from the penalties from that.
No new penalties.
Yes.
Ms. Jimenez.
So in this no repercussions for failure, have they made allowances since teacher evaluations are directly tied to these assessments that are untested, unseen, and unknown? Are teachers also going to be held harmless when these scores come in? Have they talked about that at all?
The state, I don't think, has given any direction to us with that. With it
We haven't heard
being
anything
up to the
like that yet.
districts negotiating, I think they're just kind of hands off when it comes to that. The middle school model, see some changes as well. The civics, EOC, first off, I'm sorry, the English language arts and math are the same from across all three levels. They do have science performance, and then they are going to include the civics EOC performance proficiency for the 14-15 school year. Again, there's no bonus points, there's no penalties. And then the high school, to me, it's an unfortunate thing, keeping in mind what Dr. Adams spoke of earlier with the high school grades, that of all three levels, the high school really does truly capture a lot more than just a single test. They are looking at SAT, ACT performance. They're looking at AP and IB. They're looking at graduation rates. Well, a lot of that is actually being undone for the 14-15 school year. They are looking at English language arts, math, the same performance, learning gains, and learning gains of those quartile. They're looking at science as a performance, U.S. history as a performance. However, the graduation rate, it used to be 4 different graduation rates that they used to include in school grade. It used to be the federal 4-year rate. Then they would also look at a 5-year rate. And what that is they look at the cohort of students who should have graduated in 4 years. Then they give them an extra year and say, did schools increase those? So they recognize that some students did not graduate within the 4 years, and they're looking at what percentage of those students after that 5th year graduated. So your 5-year rate is always higher than your 4-year rate. Well, they've removed that 5-year rate from the calculation. They've also removed an at-risk graduation rate. The state defined an at-risk student as an 8th grader who scored level 1 on both FCAT reading and math. And then we tracked what percentage of those students graduated. If you recall, Vero Beach High School appealed their grade last year, and it was based on this at-risk population. The graduation rate was below their threshold. Well, they've removed even tracking that at-risk population graduation rate. So it's a little unfortunate in the sense that the more metrics you involve, the more accurate of a picture. You had talked about some schools are better at some things than others. The more metrics, the more even you get, the more accurate of a picture where a school might accelerate in this part, not so much in this one. Well, they have a lot more opportunities. So with them cutting it down to just going to the 4-year graduation rate, it's decreased the true picture of what we're doing with students in graduation.
Yes, Ms. Jimenez.
Just as a point of clarification, so when you talk about the graduation rate, is the way it's calculated determined on a cohort group that starts in 9th grade, making account for attrition and so on, And 4 years later, that same cohort group, that's the graduation rate that is being calculated?
Absolutely. They look at the incoming ninth graders, they remove anyone who transfers to another school, they add anyone who transfers into your school, they remove any student that unfortunately may have deceased during that 4 years, and then they look at just those, that it's called an adjusted cohort. How many of those students, what percentage of those students received a standard diploma? And that's something that's changed in the last few years, is that it used to be GEDs, special diplomas, all those things went into the graduate, they're no longer considered part of that. So if you look at our graduation rate and our dropout rate, to a lot of people in the public, they would think that they would be add up to 100%. In reality, it's not. Our graduation rate might be 80%, dropout rate is usually under 1%. Well, whereas the other 19 to 20% of students, GED, they may have gone on to adult ed and taken further classes there. So they're not defined just solely by graduation or dropping out.
Follow
And
up?
as a follow-up, and when we, when we're at graduations and the students come up and get their diplomas, are there students that are just getting certificates of participation, or are all of those students getting a standard diploma? How does
Dr.
that
Adams?
work?
Yeah, I can answer that. The answer to that is there may be some who are just getting a certificate of completion.
That's it.
Yes. They have met the high school graduation requirements with a grade point average and the completion of courses, but they may have not passed Algebra 1. They may not have passed FCAT, those courses that they did not score at a level to.
Is it possible to get that data when we look at graduation rates, know out of all of this, who's getting a certificate of completion, and what can the district do? Is it 2 students? Is it 5 students? Is it 100 students? And what is being done to target those particular students?
And these are students who need to retake exams. There's a retake schedule. I mean, several times a year, there's an opportunity to retake. So that's, the number, I think somebody asked for that, and I think we got it. But the graduation rate doesn't take that into consideration. Those students are outside of that. And one of the things I did want to mention that Brian had mentioned that the graduation rate has changed. Now, Florida and all other states use the federal graduation rate, so there is at least that we're all using the same formula to determine a standard diploma. And that has changed. We had 3 different graduation rates over the last 10 years. Florida, the governor's, if you remember, and now the federal. So.
We do have the graduation numbers, so that is something that we do
Yeah.
know as standard diplomas. So we do have that, and that was one of the things you had mentioned. That's the 5-year rate. That's what that calculated. So the day of graduation, June 6th, I might not have passed my algebra EOC. Well, I take it in July, I pass it, I've got my diploma. The 5-year rate took that into account and showed a reflection of those things. Or it might be a student needed a credit take or a credit earn, just didn't get it by the date of graduation, but did shortly after. So.
Okay.
Any other questions?
And one more thing before we move away from the data, because, we want to talk about a couple other things, is that, based on last year's data, we would have had 4 schools in the lowest 300. It turns out that we only have 1. It's Fellsmere, and this is only based on 2 factors. One is proficiency, percent proficient in reading, and percent overall learning gains in reading. If you look at Fellsmere's score, they are a solid C, so it's not like they were a D or an F schools. We have no F schools, but they are our only school in the lowest 300. So that's where that improvement that we see that doesn't look like it in the newspaper when you just report grades. We are pleased that we don't have 4 schools in the lowest 300.
And that was a recent change with the legislature. It used to just be the lowest 100 that they would mandate this extra hour instruction, and it was just this past legislation session that they increased it from 100 to 300.
With no additional funding.
Right.
Correct.
With no additional funding.
And Fellsmere is like 254th, I think, in there,
Yeah.
in that rating, so.
Yes, Ms.
And our
Jimenez?
largest school.
Oh,
I didn't raise
I'm
my
sorry.
hand.
Oh, that's all right. I thought you wanted to speak before, and that's why I said any other questions, so go ahead.
Do we have the stats on the demographics of the school? How many are English language learners and
Yeah, we do. It's,
many are
it's very
migrant
high.
at this time?
I think the ELL, of course, Hispanic is probably 90+%.
Are you talking about at Fellsmere?
Yes.
ELL, does it have the percent, Brian, on that?
96 free and reduced and 90% minority rate. I don't have the ELL rate, but definitely 90% minority and 96% free and reduced
Yeah,
lunch.
it really hasn't changed much then?
No.
Ms. Jimenez, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, my question was along those lines. When we used to get this data, we used to get the breakdown for our ELLs, our students with disabilities, because that's really helpful in understanding the issues with the quartile, and also any of the data on the achievement gap, where we are in terms of closing the achievement gap, because that is going to be very helpful to the board in terms of goal setting, as I'm sure it's helpful to the district. So that kind of information would be very useful.
That's, you're speaking of the AMOs, the measurable outcomes, and they're just not released yet. And as soon as they are, we will be getting that information to you as well.
Thank you.
That's one of the other, I think, disadvantages is you don't get the data.
Sure.
You know, school has already started when you get the final data to begin the next year. We have enough information, believe me, to know what we need to be doing, and I'm going to let Mr. Reinberg talk a little bit about, once we finish this, but some of the things that we're doing next year, but I would like you to mention the opportunity gap information that you gave all the schools, because there are schools out there that look just like us that are performing at high levels, and so.
So just, I didn't finish with this slide, the rest of the high school model, the acceleration success is just going to be 100%. It is just going to be success. It's not going to be the participation. We used to benefit from the level or the amount of students taking them. Now it's just a success on the tests. And there are no college readiness statistics. So we used to have and benefit from our SAT and ACT scores. That's no longer being calculated in this.
Dr. Adams?
No, I was just going to say, we were just talking about that college readiness, and I was wondering if we still got that report. We don't get that any longer.
It's the 13-14 this past school year. When we get our high school grades in December, that will be the last time that it has that measure.
Okay. Because we were talking, you were asking me about that.
Yes, Ms. Jimenez?
Just as an information question, when you talked about the acceleration success, in your opinion, is that an improvement to the grade, or is that not?
I think it's not. As a former AP and IB teacher, there is a vast amount of research that shows that kids benefit from being in that class regardless of what they get on that. The increased rigor, the type of instruction they benefit, providing the opportunity for kids, that is huge. I was never, ever caught up on my success rate. It was obviously something that I looked at, but I never wanted 100% of my students to pass the AP and IB exams. And the reason for that is if I ever had 100%, then that means I turned away kids that could have been in those. So there is a balance between just letting everyone in and allowing opportunities for kids, because you might have 100 kids that are in your class, you might have all 100. Well, if you let in 10 more, how many of those 10 would have passed if they're in? And students there's a benefit to being in those college-ready, college-level courses in high school. And so I think by taking away the participation, it's taking away a little bit of the incentive for that. Now, what they've done to counter that is the success rate. It was a complex formula, but essentially it looked at just those kids taking it in the percentage. What they're going to do for this success is look at the overall population. They haven't stipulated exactly how they're going to do it, but by keeping the denominator essentially your student population, it no longer encourages schools to say, well, you guys aren't going to take it. We're only going to give AP and IB to those kids who we think we're going to pass it. So it's still encouraging schools to have more and more students take it. But I think by not separating the two, it does a disservice to the public and understanding how many kids are taking this. On the flip side, the formula was so convoluted that if you saw 90% for a participation, people in the public would think, well, that means 90% of the high school students take it, but it really wasn't that. There was bonus points if you took more than one test. So, my personal opinion, I think that it's a negative.
You have additional?
Yeah, no, it was well said. You know, I think that the thing that you worry about is that there may be some that don't get into it that should be because of the high level rigor that they're getting, and these students are the best prepared to go on to the next level. And so I would hate to think that that sort and selection becomes even deeper because of school grade.
I think we have a small technical
Yeah, I
problem
think
here.
it might clicker. Judy, you mind moving the mouse over off of that? I don't know if it's,
Move the mouse off this.
there we go. Can you click on that?
Just click.
I don't know if this has died or
You mean,
not.
hit the space bar now.
You want her to click on the
So,
arrow?
yeah, if you don't mind, maybe I'll just let you know when to click, or this
Okay.
it just died, I'm sorry. So the school grades are just a small piece of the puzzle, and thank you. It's not meant to excuse or minimize school grades. We've talked at length about they are important. The public does carry a lot of weight to school grades. But the story we want to tell is that school grades are just one piece of the puzzle. Dr. Adams mentioned parents calling saying, you know, my child was slated to go to this school. It's now a C school. Should I remove them from that school? And when she told me that, I thought, good. I would, when my child gets to middle schools, I absolutely want them to be at these schools. I have every confidence in these schools. So we wanted to kind of share with you a little bit about what the schools are doing apart from these school grades. We mentioned earlier, school grades are only on FCAT. It's only on certain grade levels. But our schools are more than just A, B, C, D, F schools. They're schools of innovation. This past year, Glendale, Highlands, Dodgertown were all given greater flexibility in how they approached their education. And as a result, all three schools showed considerable gains. We mentioned earlier Glendale from an F, a failing school, to an A school, measured by school grades. But apart from that, huge gains in the level of students. Our schools are schools with quality educators. We have Lindsay Matheny, who is one of the 5 finalists for Teacher of the Year. It's not just one, we have hundreds of phenomenal teachers. We have schools that offer high-quality programs that meet the diverse needs of Indian River's diverse population, apart from what happens from 8 to 2, Monday through Friday. This summer, we had over 1,500 students participate in an 11-day Title I program that helped prepare them for the new school year. Windsor provided $75,000 for a summer literacy on the lagoon, where we had 60 rising third graders provided with a real-world literacy program kind of centered around the environment. They went to the ELC to kind of engage them in that learning. We have schools that that foster innovation and encourage individual achievement. Evan Mackay, I mean, I think I could put his resume up there, and no matter what piece of that resume you look at, it's just phenomenal. But it's a school that fosters this type of individual achievement.
You know, he's going to China. Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing. He's amazing.
He is amazing. And he is a super nice young man.
You know,
One of our public school students.
He is. He's a super nice young man.
And over the years, the last 10 years, teaching us AP and IB, we had a lot of
Yeah.
these type of students. And the great thing about Evan is he's so personable. You know, it's
Right.
so.
And they've gone on to do great things and get into the best schools.
Absolutely. There's schools that prepare our students for a high-quality career. This is a piece about our vocational programs. We were ranked number 12 in the state for total FTE with vocational. But when you consider the number of schools in our district, we were actually ranked number 1 in the average FTE earned per school.
And this is important because, again, this was Brian putting up there. He put vocational programs. If your superintendent did it, I would put career and technical.
Yes.
But our community always asks us about vocational programs, always. That is the most, it's one of the questions that I get over and over again. Why don't we have vocational programs? So Brian, see, I appreciate your perspective
No,
because you
it's-
see it, but that's what our career and technical programs are, and we do so well. We have comprehensive high schools that are preparing a lot of students, and we really should be proud of that.
Yes, Ms. Jimenez.
Thank you. Can you help us unpack that? So when you say that the average FTE earned per school is 116.45, does that mean that what does that mean?
What it means is that there are 3 areas in which the state reimburses you for performance, okay? It's IB, AP. If students score at certain levels, the state supports that by giving you additional FTE dollars. The third areas are students who pass industrial certified exams. So if they pass an industry certification, the state reimburses us at the same rate that they reimburse for AP and IB. And the purpose of that is to put dollars back into the program because, as you know, these career and technical programs, the AP, IB, you've got an agenda item tonight about the cost of tests and so on. This generates those dollars that it costs to run programs like that. But it's industry certification in this instance.
All right, thank you.
And I assume before this goes up on the website, the PowerPoint goes up, we're going to see
Yes.
career and technical.
Beside it.
I tell you
Side,
what,
or parens somewhere.
it
Career
has
technical,
become
paren-
a
for
mental
vocational programs.
has become a mental block for me because I've been corrected 10 times now, and I know it's career technical. So my apologies. Yes, I will.
No apology.
No
okay.
apology
It's
necessary,
okay.
because
you
that
know,
is, unfortunately,
that's-
that word is what the
yeah.
community, that's what they align with.
Yeah, I think that should
Not
be in
career and
parentheses.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be a better.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then we mentioned the AP and IB success. Maybe,
Maybe not.
maybe not.
Hit the arrow, Judy.
Well,
Hit the space bar.
other way.
You have a question, Ms. Disney has a question.
I have a comment, I've had a lot of opportunity to be in the public and talk to the community members lately. And overwhelmingly, I get asked about vocational. I get asked about what are we doing right? And if they don't know that we have such a high number of students going to service academies, that we have such a high number of students that are national merit finalists compared to other districts, about some of the successes in our science. I mean, they don't know about those things. We've got to do a better job of telling people about it. And it's not about patting ourselves on the back. It's about creating support for public education. And there has to be a vision that there's something there for me. These parents need to know that their students can be successful in public schools, and the students need to see just how far they can go. So we are doing a disservice, I believe, by not doing a better job getting this information out.
And it's hard to get it out there on a regular basis. So it's like we invited the Press Journal and took them on a tour, and they did an article on it, and it was great. It was like the 27 Service Academies. If you saw the article, there was a wonderful spread on Sebastian River High School and the number of, and pictures of students. But it's like, what are you telling me today? You know what I mean? It's trying to keep it out there on some kind of a basis that you keep reminding. So that's the challenge. But, it's really, everywhere I go, I try and talk about career and technical simply because I get that question.
Yes.
And I've talked to the Board of Realtors. I mean, every group that I talk to, I mention that simply because of perception.
Ms. Jimenez.
And I think, one of the things that we can do to be proactive around this is make sure that, we share this information. And one of the things that I'll be sharing when we have our discussion session today when we look at our legislative platform, the vision for the legislative platform is on the back, and I shared some of the data with the superintendent that I'd like to see included in that, if it's the board's pleasure, is to highlight specifically these types of things that we are doing in the school district. So not just for legislators, but for our community. And when I look at these numbers, you know, I ask myself, is it possible to know not just Vero Beach High School, but out of all of the students in our school district that take the AP, what's the pass rate? Out of all the students that take the IB, what's the pass rate? How many students participate in service academies? How many students, you know, because this is all about data, and we have to promote our data that is not captured by this grade. And if we get into the habit of doing that snapshot of our district every year, the CAFR has all this data nested in it, and the community can't take the time to dig it out. But if we can provide something that's just a one-shot snapshot, that is a wonderful tool. And we used to have these fast facts years ago for the school district. and that
Actually, we have one
kind
we're
of-
working on right now.
Migrant graduation rate.
Right, so I have a copy of the rough draft, but this totally dovetails into it, and it makes me believe that it's doable. So I'm excited.
I appreciate that, because it is, like we said, at school grades, it's easy to latch onto a B or a C or a D, but in reality, our schools are a story. That's, you know, school grade is a chapter in a large book, and there's lots of chapters. So I appreciate exactly what you're saying. National Merit Programs, another thing. The schools recognize these students for their academic achievements. Ms. Disney, you mentioned the service academy. Sebastian River High School has had more appointments to the service academies than any other school in the state. And a unique fact about this is that this year they had 3 appointments. All 3 were to the Coast Guard Academy. And I'm not sure if you're fully aware, but the Coast Guard Academy is the most difficult school to get into. They have well over 5,000 applicants, and they accept somewhere around 200 to 250. Their acceptance rate borders 6% each year. And to have 3 students out 300, I mean, that's 1% of the entire incoming class of the Coast Guard Academy is represented by Sebastian River High School across the entire nation. I mean, that's phenomenal. You just don't see that that often. So,
And they have people behind the scenes working on the students' behalf to make that happen.
absolutely. Michael Stutsky does a fantastic job of preparing those students for the rigors of those, and many have gone on to distinguish themselves at those academies. So. Having wonderful success with this battery. There we go. So the next steps, where do we go from here? We've seen some phenomenal success over the past few years. We also recognize that there is room for further growth. We are going to launch into a bit of unknown in the sense that FCAT has been replaced by this new AIR test. Some of the EOCs will continue. So this new testing will only replace the math FCAT, algebra, and geometry EOC, as well as the FCAT math and reading 2.0. We still have continued demands in our schools to prepare students for not only college life, but also career life. And we find ourselves at a pivotal point. So we'd like to highlight several programs, initiatives that we are implementing going forward to meet those new demands. And if I had my clicker, I would. Thank you. First off, we have a brand new product through Performance Matters called the Early Warning System that is currently in place. We've beta tested it for the last 3 or 4 months. We've rolled it out at the summer earful session, a few trainings. It is something that's going to be fully in place this coming year. In the past, we've always had rich data, but it's been in a myriad of sources. What the early warning system does is it puts all of these different data sources in one place, and it puts it at the fingertips of those who need it most, the teachers in schools. So we're tracking attendance on a daily basis. We're tracking discipline. the mobility of students so that teachers have an idea that this student, while I just saw them in August, they've been at 5 different schools over the last 3 years, or whatever the case might be. And we're looking at the course failure so a teacher can understand the course failures of this, not just within their class, particularly at the secondary level, but system-wide. We're looking at tardies, whether they've been retained in the past. And it's not necessarily to identify them or to put a label on them, but what it does is it allows us to provide a greater multi-tiered support system for those students. It's understanding where those students are. Their FCAT performance, in a lot of cases, is ability. But in a lot of cases, what research shows is that there are these covariates, these factors that are influencing their performance. And those factors aren't academic. It's about attendance. It's about course failure. It's about all these other things that go into it. So by allowing teachers to understand a different perspective on these students, it allows us to create a multi-tiered support system so that we can provide the support for these students where they need it, rather than just this arbitrary throwing a dart at the wall and hoping that this program works.
And I think this year the legislature is requiring to do it at the middle schools, but they had been working on this throughout the year, and it'll be system-wide.
The actual statute is just middle school, and it was only 3 indicators. This is K through 12, and we've got a plethora of indicators that we can look at.
Yes, Ms. Jimenez.
Yes, one of the questions I have about a system like this, I know one of the challenges our school district faces are the students at the middle school level in particular that are already being identified at risk because they have not successfully completed all the credits at 6th grade, 7th grade, then 8th grade, and then they give them names. They're the 88ers or the 99. I don't know what the names are. What are we doing? I'm sure that you've identified those students, and it's wonderful to understand all the factors, but what specifically is in place, say in the coming year, to help those students move forward? Because you can have a multi-tiered support system, but if you're looking at factors that are not just academic factors that are within control of the school district, what kind of partnership, what is going on in order to help those students be successful, because they're not,
This is a very complex response, which could take, honestly, a good hour. But I want to go ahead and just sort of honor your question there with a little bit of fodder, okay? So this book here, Change Leader, Learning to Do What Matters Most. So if you're someone like myself and you come into the district, you're new, like in any place of employment that you accept. You're the new person from out of town. People don't know you. It takes a while to get an understanding of, why should I even listen to you? I mean, people in Indian River, I've noticed, have been living here for generations. We've been doing things a certain way for a long time. And along with that, though, the state has changed the rules. The game, I guess, if you want to call it that or not, depending on how you perceive this whole grading system. The reality of it is, though, is things have changed around us and the expectations and the requirements. So somebody like myself, even if I had a great idea, I'm still new. People are trying to figure you out, what it is that you have to offer them, and they're not even sure that what you're selling them is what they even want. So it's a process. I often refer to this process as one that not everybody's willing and not everybody will understand. But over time, I think it's fair to say that people generally will embrace it as they become more acquainted to the turnaround transformation process. I was brought here with the idea of not just in curriculum, but also how we could support our leaders in schools. With that, we also have to look at how we've been doing our practice over the course of the years. That invariably means that what we're doing in the classroom each and every day, how we're addressing, as we refer to, Tier 1 instruction. What does that look like? Or are we assuming that because we taught it and the students should get it and those that didn't should get extra support after school? So we have to begin the idea that maybe what we're doing during the day or instructionally or as the leader of the building might not be the best approach for today's grading system. That's the first thing that we have to honor. I want to go ahead and I want to mention something within this book that I think is very helpful, if I could digress in this book. It's called Honor the Implementation Dip. Okay? For a long time, we've been finding that when organizations try something new, even if there has been some pre-implementation preparation, the first few months are often bumpy. How could it be otherwise? New skills and understandings have a learning curve. Once we brought this out in the open, a lot of people immediately felt better knowing that it was normal and everyone goes through it. This finding led to the realization that we needed to focus on capacity building at this critical stage. One of the things that we brought forward was the fact, and we honored the fact, that instructional leadership, what happens at the principal level, is what transcends throughout the rest of the buildings. In every school system that I've ever worked with or supported, you found pockets within the schools where things were working well, but always there was one common denominator. If the leadership was strong and the instructional practices that the leader had knowledge of were, I guess, concrete within that leader, the school would sustain success over a long period of time. If the leader was performing at a mediocre level over time, then the school would struggle too. Hence, we created the Fellowship for Instructional Leaders, EARFUL, for that distinct purpose. It was an honoring of the fact that we have to build instructional leadership capacity first and foremost within the buildings, but also honoring the fact that leaders alone don't get the work done. It takes informal leaders that exist, whether we honor that or not, in the buildings that either make or break change or transformation or improve the product of which we're trying to achieve. So hence we acknowledged this and informed the school leaders to invite teams of staff to come to regular sessions on turnaround and transformational topics that have shown research-based to improve schools. Those topics, as you are aware, many of you have attended EARFUL sessions, are conversations where they're structured in nature, where we look at the work. This is one of the main things that we've been doing this past year. It's also an acknowledgement, as we've brought forward to the staff as we've done this work, that we need to look at students differently than what we have in the past. And we need to look at our practice of how we've addressed them to improve their academic achievement too. The early warning system is one component of many factors in this whole process of supporting schools. The early warning system acknowledges that not all students are equally in attendance at the same rate. Some even leave the school day early, which that is also loss of time on task. You have discipline, a mirage of different discipline issues. They vary from very minor to classroom disruption to very overt, gross misbehavior, fighting, narcotics. I mean, the gamut runs across the playing field. And you have to, also we acknowledge that within students that are attending our schools, that many are here because their parents have moved them here maybe for the third, fourth, or fifth time. Course failures also look differently from different kids. But in the end, when you look at all of these factors, it's just data. What are we doing? What are we honoring as individuals within the school buildings, as you said, Ms. Jimenez, to change our practice differently to address these students? It's one thing to look at the data, but what are we doing? This summer EARFUL session, I think, was a culmination of thought processes throughout the year where we questioned and had staff question within themselves about who owns what's happening or not happening in the school buildings. And although we would have liked to start that kind of work at the beginning of the year, people were still questioning and looking at me as if, what does he know? He just got here, right? And what is he going to tell us that we don't already know? I mean, I went to Florida State University. What does he know? He went to Michigan State University. You know, so there's this whole trust aspect in this transformation process. So as we look at the early warning system and we look at the capacity for doing the work, I think it's a fair assessment to state right up front. Our leaders and our staff are in a different mindset than they were when we started this last year. Although it may not appear yet in the school grades that we would like to see, there's something going on. When you build a ship, you start with the keel, not with the food line, which everybody sees when they go on a cruise ship. They don't think about what is the keel built like, what is that strength of the ship. Not one of us have questioned whether or not the ship is going to break when it hits a wave. We ask things like what type of entertainment, what type of food are we going to have, how fast are they going to get us on the boat, what type of excursions are we going to enjoy, all those surface things that are out there. Earful this year, I want to be very sincere with you, has been an instrumental way for addressing the instructional capacity of what either is working or not working, and forcing individuals to have that kind of thought process within themselves and the school teams. So it's a complex answer, but I think it's also one worth saying right up front that I believe very sincerely, and if you put a lie detector test here, you would see it pinging way over here, that I believe completely in what we're doing, and the fact that I've seen it happen before, that this district is on the right path for improvement. And I've said this also, too, it's because we have a strong leader. And that's not just saying that. Dr. Adams has a vision for this district. It cannot happen unless that vision falls down through her and her lens to make sure that that happens. And I've been in districts whereby that's not the case, and then it falls on its face. So I wanted to honor what your question is. I want to also tell you, though, it's about our daily practice, how we are addressing Tier 1 instruction. I'll get to more of that a little bit later, what our next steps are for improving that going forward in the 2014-15 school year.
Thank you, Mr. Reinberg. Well said.
One other thing that, and Mr. Reinberg touched on this, is this institutional capacity for data analysis. In a lot of respects, a lot of our educators in the past kind of looked at data almost like this, where's the solution in the data? This is the end. And what we've found over this past year through this Earful is this capacity to understand that data is a starting point. It's where we are, and it points us to where we need to go. And that the real conversation happens after we look at the data. So we have increased the capacity. We continue to increase the capacity for data analysis. Performance Matters, we've added a myriad of different data sources to that platform so that teachers of kindergarten students, teachers of 12th grade students can look at data for their students. We've also done a number of school-based trainings to teach teachers and to teach administrators and leaders how to examine and analyze the data. We've got currently 3 of our district staff going through this master certification through Performance Matters. It's a 12-week course to really get into the system and learn how it works and the different capacities of the system. We've also partnered with Learning Alliance in developing a data analysis protocol for the year for their K through 2 teachers to really look at DIBELS and FAIR and the Foundations program and help drive instruction from that data analysis. The next slide is talking about Earful, and Mr. Reinberg has spoken to you about that. I can tell you from someone who's gone through it, someone who is a part of this system, that has been a phenomenal change. I've seen from the beginning of the year to this past summer Earful, a lot of the team members really just take ownership of the process, recognize the benefit of it, and have done a lot of change with it. Going forward, and stop me if you're going to talk about the ear tips. Were you going to mention that?
So as you look at this diagram or conceptual framework, you'll see that the Earful process is multifaceted. There's not one element that we're addressing. Actually, this conceptual framework has a few other components to it. But throughout the year, you don't provide the Cadillac, you sort of in small bites, right? And you present transformation in a small and succinct kind of way. And so at the beginning of the year, we presented school transformation around the idea of the emphasis on relationships, school culture, developing that within the schools to set the stage and the environment for a academic rich learning on behalf of our students, with regard to an honor of the fact that teachers and adults and parents and students have a different levels of self-efficacy for the idea of education and for themselves, and how can we honor the improvement in their thinking about the importance of education and its value for them. With regard to the art of instruction, all teachers, we've all been in classrooms. We've had some we would prefer to be in more, and others we were thinking, wow, I got through that, right? And so when we talk about that, you're referring to the teacher's facilitation skills. How did the teacher engage you? How did the teacher involve the students in the learning process? How did they mediate thinking to higher level orders? So it's an honoring of the reality that not all teachers instruct the same. And then more importantly, we have variances of literacy capacity. Students that have a variety of levels of both oral communication. I mean, I may be sounding well today, but when I was in high school, you would never see me standing in front of anybody and talking about anything. And so I've changed over the years, and so I think the more opportunities that we give kids to have oral speaking and require that as part of their normal practice, but also writing and reading fluency. And the balance, as this is often referred to as balanced literacy approach to addressing students' skill set. Within these organizations, then, we've begun the process of introducing 3 subset organizations. One of them is our multi-tiered system of support, but not as one for special ed. We're not going to refer to MTSS as a system for special ed. We're going to refer to multi-tiered system of support with the acknowledgement that approximately 80% of our kids should be passing statewide assessments with our first order of instructional practice, meaning that when you give the instruction for students and you get done, 80% of your kids should be successful. You should find them. Okay, we should have 80% of our kids getting what we're teaching them the first time around. We should not have to send the majority of our kids to after-school programs to get what we're teaching the first time around. So we have to look at our practice differently and our behaviors in the first time around with 80% success in mind. And that is how the multi-tiered system of support is changing. And we introduced that at our Earful Summer Session about what does that look like? What should a true multi-tier system support system look like? And then this fall, we are introducing with the modified days that we have within our calendar what we're commonly referring or calling our ear tips, our teachers improving their performance for students. And we've been setting the stage for that since January. Although we haven't had our first session, actually we have a core design team that's meeting down as we speak, receiving continued further training to make sure that that professional development series is authentic, but it's also going to improve practice. And who's on our core design team? 5 of our finalists for our Teachers of the Year last year, Luke Flynn, Beth Weatherstone, and some representatives from the high school, and including myself, Beth Hofer, our coordinator for professional development, and our staff developers are a part of this core design team. And throughout the year during our modified days, we will be tackling the number one thing that actually improves student achievement, and that is what does our daily behavior of practice look like in the classroom. So throughout the year, we will be challenging people to look within their practice to see how well it is that their delivery of instruction is improving student achievement. And as you can imagine, if you watched a video of yourself, you know, or if you had an opportunity to reflect, you probably would make some changes. And so as you can imagine, this is going to be an ongoing sort of an aha for everyone. So just think 1,300 teachers going through this simultaneously, looking at their practice in a structured kind of way. This core design team is working with our department to make that a reality for all kids so that we can improve practice in the classroom for everybody all the time in a succinct kind of way, and that will be with our modified days. And then last but not least, we've formed a new group where I did, with the help and support of our literacy coaches, called ICE, Institute for Coaching Excellence. All coaching is not the same, so we had to retool our coaches and their thinking about what coaching is and how you can help and support them, and then with the idea that coaching is just not reading. And as you're already well aware, we're ahead of the state on this because we have been retooling our coaches to be thinking about reading, writing, and oral speaking. And as you were informed by Brian just a little bit ago, the scores for next year will be ELA, which are incorporating writing as well. So we are ahead of the thought process, knowing full well that this is a comprehensive approach. Now, there are many other elements to what we're doing. Like I said, this is what do you call it? A release. How you release it a little bit at a time. You got to have people to have time to digress that. There are elements that are not on this particular conceptual framework that address leadership, implementation, and also sustainability as well. So those elements are not a part of this framework, but it's not the appropriate time for us in our work with the district.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Jimenez.
I just want to say thank you. This is very exciting, and I know that one of the things that we've talked about in the past is teachers having time to do all this, and I was really pleased to look at the calendar that was included in your packet and how you set aside that specific time for teachers within that framework to get the support that they need and collaborate in teams. I think that's really meaningful. I do have a question. When we look at the MTSS and working with children, what is the school district doing in terms of digging deeper? Because sometimes students may have, for example, they may have ADD or ADHD, and they may have other issues. How does the district go out about identifying other learning disabilities or other issues that may be impeding students from being successful? Because it seems like there's so many of these students that are either English language learners or have an already identified issue and they're still struggling. How do you go further to make sure that there isn't some other barrier to learning, that you keep using these strategies for your English language learners or your ADHD students, but there's something else? How does that happen?
Actually, and I'm going to be real cautious in how I respond because I don't want to offend or alienate my peers. And I consider my peers the teachers. But the first thing I think we have to do is look within ourselves about how our practice might be perceived to our students. When you do something, I don't care what it is, there's this general inclination to think that the way you're doing it might be the right way. So if you don't get it, and you're the receiver of that, you often think it's not you. You think it's you might even subscribe to the bell curve. Well, obviously some of you are not going to get it because not all of you are ever going to get it kind of mentality. So you, right away, if you take on that approach, and it's normal to do, you close down the idea that it might be something that you could do differently. When you start talking about it from what am I doing, that's as a result of the scores being the way they are, then you start self-reflecting in such a way that you start looking at the students differently, and as a direct result of that reflection, you start thinking about the needs of the student in a way that you didn't before. That's part of ear tips throughout this year. Reflective practice is our professional development. And the data will be about what we might need to do differently to engage the learner. It's a very sensitive topic. It's going to require us, like Earful, to create those conversations that are safe to have within the room. It's going to require us to learn how to talk differently so that it comes out in a proactive, constructive kind of way, as opposed to a demeaning, tear down, derogatory kind of way. So that's all part of the work that's sort of our structure that we're taking into account. So it's a when I said earlier, it's a complex conversation. That's part of what I mean is that we're dealing with adults that have been doing things a certain number of years. I mean, obviously I come from Michigan, have a different approach or a different spin on it. And I could subscribe to the belief that we did it right. If I held that belief, then I'm not open to the idea that there might be other ways. So this work that we're going to do with teachers is to start to begin to open that up. And actually, just prior to my coming here, I was a little late. I was working with Fellsmere Academy, and I was challenging them on their lowest 300. As you can see, they've been doing a lot of work. And I was challenging them, pushing them even further in a reflective, self-reflective kind of way for the work that they have as they address this work that's required of them for being at lowest 300 schools. So it is a process, but I think it's an adult process because students have this tendency to rise to whatever bar that we set and believe that they can achieve. So it's self-fulfilling. So hopefully that somewhere in there helps that. But
And with that process, the MTSS is a multi-tiered approach. So the people that are at the table having the conversation is more than just the teacher bringing that new level of conversation. It's a school psychologist, it's a school speech and language. So these are, when you speak
Behavioral
of multi-tiered, you're talking about a variety of people looking at students and having conversations about that.
It was a unique conversation we had this summer in the sense that we set them up, and actually Mr. Reinberg did this to a few of us in the sense of, take a problem at a school and identify what are the things that you would do to address this problem, so Algebra 1 performance or something like that. And when you look at everything that a school would do, very little of it's Tier 1. Most of it's at Tier 2 and Tier 3. And so one of the things we did at the Summer Earful is really look at what is our Tier 1? And that's what Mr. Reinberg's talking about. It's a self-reflective. It's the teacher saying, what can I do better? In the sense of, I'm going to give my lesson. If you don't get it, well, that means you need Tier 2 or Tier 3 support. It's not my problem. So the MTSS, we really kind of taught them how to form an accurate school goal that truly does provide Tier 1 support, Tier 2, and Tier 3 support.
But also to add on to not just academics. And looking at the early warning system, how we address students with mobility, how we address students with behavior, how we address with tardies. So it's not an academia-only system of support. It's a multi-tiered system of support that keeps all of that in mind. And all of this, he's not giving himself a lot of credit for this, I will. Brian was instrumental in being a part of this work of creating this early warning system and making it so simple that staff could feel comfortable in using that. With a click of a mouse. You could just, Johnny on the spot, you could in real time find out who could use that level of support. You don't have to contact the technology department and wait for a week for a report. You can get this information in as fast as you can blink your eye. So.
Ms. Disney?
Thank you. I'm not sure if you were in the room earlier when I was talking about packaging information for parents so that they really understand the issues. But when I attended one of your Earful sessions, you packaged the attendance information in such a clear way where you were saying how the percentage of students that miss 30 days or more by the time they finished elementary school, they had missed a year of school. And then, you know, in their school career, they missed 2 full years of school if they're missing that amount of time. I mean, that really impacted me in a way that I've repeated it to the community, to parents, and I think that those pieces of information, the better job we can do to get that information out, I think you'll see changes in practices all over the county in employment situations, in physicians' offices having other hours. I mean, I think those pieces of information have so much punch when you can get it out in the right way. But it's our job to do it. You know, we've got to figure out a way to get that out. Because
Attendance
that
is the one thing that
Yeah.
all of the community can embrace, because
Yeah.
if somebody was to walk in here right now, would that person draw your attention?
Yes.
Okay, that takes an element of thought off from the speaker. The speakers are our teachers. So when the phone rings to send a student home early, or for it be a meaningful doctor's appointment, it challenges the teacher's ability to keep students on task. And so it looks good to have that taken care of, but maybe if we can get and raise that level of awareness that the school day begins and ends at a certain time, and any time in between that that's taken away from that is a threat to the instruction, not just for the student that's leaving, but for everyone else too. And so it's the number one thing that our doctors, our judges, our probation officers, when they want to meet with kids, our social workers, you know, all of that stuff is a potential threat to what our requirement is for our community, and that is to prepare them for the next century and that we're living in now, and to be able to perform and to compete both on a county level, a national level, and worldwide. So attendance is a main piece that everybody can support.
And one of the things they've done with the attendance magazine is to get that out to various agencies within the community, because it had a lot of facts in it. It was well put together. And I think the goal of that group is to do it more once a year, you know, trying to get information. The Learning Alliance has been helping promote that as well. Okay, we've got a,
We have one
we have
follow-up.
an executive session we need to go to as well, so.
So I don't have to be sold on the attendance thing, but, you know, when I go to the school to pick up a preschooler, a 3-year-old, you have to walk up, so you're not in a car, so you hear what parents are saying as they're coming in to get their kids out early. And most of the time you hear, they don't want to wait the line. So, you know, those parents need that information. I mean, they don't have that information. I'm such an optimist. I believe if they had that information, it would change their behavior.
We've
So-
actually, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt.
No, so, you know, you have the information, you have the data.
You need to do
You've
better
shared
job.
it with us, but we need to get it to the people who need to hear it.
We're adding an attendance code for this coming year for the elementary of early release. So it's something we've known that's gone on, but with elementary students, you get attendance at the conduct class once a day, not at the high school where you can track 7 periods. So one thing we've added for this fall is there will actually be a code for an early release so we can start tracking that. So.
I'd like to conclude, because there was one more piece, but I do think it's important for the board to know the research that we've done on
Sure.
the Foundations program for the early years.
We partner with Wilson Language to examine our Foundations curriculum. We had a couple years of dibbles without Foundations, and we were able to examine the growth that occurred during those few years and compare it to the growth that has occurred these past few years with the Foundations. And the results of this study showed a marked improvement with the Foundations curriculum, in particular with the ELL, the English language learners, because it is that, and I'm out of my expertise here, the phonemic awareness of the basics, the foundations of literacy. What they found is that even with our ELL learners, it was even that much more improvement. So it's just further proof that what we're doing actually does work.
So,
Yes. Ms. Missy Menu.
Okay, I know we're in a time crunch, but would it be possible to get some of that data at some point? Thank you.
And what we can do is give the board members a copy of the report that we received and, so it's complex, but the good news is systemically, we are looking at school improvement, and systemically, we are building strong teams to be able to, change what's happening in schools. So it's been interesting to watch Brian this year, because I knew Brian as a teacher in the classroom, and I know him as a person who is supporting the entire district. And, way back when I was a teacher in a classroom, my world was this big, because your world is your kids. But now you can see the whole thing, and it gives you a perspective and information that you don't have. But it's good to have that fresh memory in your midst to kind of guide you as you go along. So I appreciate the work that you've done and how you've been supporting us. So.
Thank you again, staff, board members. We do have an executive session. Meeting adjourned.